Hello, and welcome to the History of the Germans, Season 10, The Empire in the 15th Century. I typed, what does a typical German town look like into Perplexity AI, and it came up with half-timbered houses, cobbled streets and alleys, medieval architecture, greenery and decorations, and regional variations. And that's not half bad, unless you come to Berlin, Hamburg, Munich or Cologne in search of any of the above. But at some point in time, even Berlin, Hamburg, Munich and Cologne were full of half-timbered houses on cobbled streets and alleys, overlooked by medieval churches and town halls. And some of the smaller cities like Rothenburg ob der Tauber, Nördlingen, Idstein, Miltenberg, Lübeck, Esslingen, and literally hundreds more do indeed have all of the above features. But these are very rarely medieval. In fact, most of these half-timbered houses and even city walls date from the 15th and 16th century, not from the high Middle Ages in the 12th and 13th. Many German histories skip over this period in order to get to the Reformation, which I think is a shame, because the 15th century did not just shape the physical appearance of the country, but much of its geographical and mental makeup. This is the time when the empire reaches its most challenging phase. This is not the difficult second album, this is more Tina Turner in 1982, when her cover of Shame, Shame, Shame reached only number 47 in the Netherlands charts. The emperors, Sigismund and Frederick III, were blessed with very long reigns. But they did not bless the empire very much with their presence. They spent their time mostly abroad in Hungary and Bohemia, or in their personal territories, though with good reason. For the first time since Otto the Great, the empire is subjected to a sustained threat from outside forces. The last invasion, the one by the Mongols, had been terrifying but mercifully brief. But now a more patient and a more persistent conqueror was slowly advancing up the Balkans. The Ottomans. They were still 800 kilometers from Vienna, but 40 years earlier they had been 1200 kilometers away. Meanwhile, the empire's Christian neighbors, the Poles, the Dukes of Burgundy, the Kings of France, the Venetians, the Milanese, and the Scandinavian kingdoms were nibbling away at the territory of the empire, whilst the Swiss were wandering off into the Alpine glow. The great 14th century emperor Karl IV had already given away much of the old kingdom of the Arilat, and his son Sigismund was in no position to hold the erosion in what is today's Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. On the positive side, the Great Western Schism that had burdened the Catholic Church first with 2 and then 3 competing popes had ended at the Council of Constance, thanks in no small part to the efforts of our Emperor Sigismund. But this great gathering of all of Christendom and its successor event at Basel had failed to deliver on its second task, the reform of the Church. This inability to stamp out at least the worst excesses of ecclesiastical greed and debauchery had tipped the Bohemian reformers into a revolution that not only lasted 16 years, but one that proved impossible to defeat militarily. It is unclear how much resonance the radical reform ideas of the Hussites had outside Czechia, but there were a sign of things to come. With the emperors absent and the church still in deep disarray, the ball was firmly in the court of the territorial princes, both physically and metaphysically. This is where we see the beginnings of actual state and state bureaucracies developing in Germany, but in a very different way to similar trends occurring in the more consolidated kingdoms of France and England. These principalities were a lot smaller and a lot more fragile, which posed some unique challenges. First up, if you're small, the question is, how do you get bigger? We will look at some of the key players: the Archbishop of Mainz, the Landgrafs of Hesse, the Markgrafs of Baden, and the Dukes of Württemberg, to see how that can and had been done. And within this sits the question of what happened to the cities. We will look at how Würzburg tried to achieve its ambition to become a free city. Then there are the Imperial Knights. Their military role is changing and their independence is threatened. And they're trying to find new ways to remain relevant. and in the process they develop some seriously cool outfits. So, let's assume you were a successful territorial ruler. Then the next challenge was to produce a male heir, or more precisely, the right number of male heirs. You need at least one growing up to manhood and survive the wars and diseases to make sure your principality would continue to exist at all. But you did not want to have too many spares, so that you would not have to divide it up into ever smaller entities. We will look at the Duchy of Braunschweig-Lüneburg to understand the inherent problems and the coping mechanisms the princely families developed to deal with it. And then we will look at the Wittelsbachs, who provide another great example of how not to do it, as well as a lovely story about what happens when the precious heir falls for the wrong woman. Growing your territory at home was one way to glory, but there were alternative options that became almost a standing feature. The princely families of the empire turned into a near inexhaustible reservoir from where to pluck a king, should you happen to have mislaid the previous monarch or you are in need of a new one. Over the centuries, German princes would ascend the thrones of Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Russia, Poland, of course my homeland of Blighty, Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, and probably some more I have forgotten. Basically everywhere except for France, Italy and Portugal. And that process was established then in the 15th century, and we will look into it in more detail when we discuss Pomerania and Oldenburg. We will also touch on the great wars of the period, the wars between alliances of princes, cities and knights associations. And these were the Bavarian War, the Mainzer Stiftsfehde, the War of the Princes and the Soester and Münsteraner Stiftsfehde. Have you never heard of them? Well, don't worry, you are not alone. Some of these were straightforward wars over who owns what territory, but one, the largest and I think most interesting of them, was over the system of appeals in the imperial law court system. We'll hear all about these wars, about a victorious Count Palatinate on the Rhine and a fellow elector they dubbed the German Achilles. All that sounds somewhat depressing and like another festival of blood and gore. But despite all of this strife and feuding, this is also a time of great innovation. Gutenberg came up with the printing press, a technology that would undermine the authority of the Catholic Church, fan the flames which led to the Reformation, create the communication infrastructure needed for the rise of modern science, and even, if Neil Postman is to be believed, led to the invention of childhood as an extended protected phase in the lives of young people. And like the internet and social media, the printing press demanded new types of content: maps, encyclopedias, fiction, political pamphlets, engravings, all these things that open the world up to the world. More universities are founded in this period than at any other time before the 1960s, churning out not just priests, but lawyers, writers, and intellectuals. All these territorial princes, the bishops, abbots, city councils, and rich merchants demanded art and architecture to celebrate their achievements, and pieces made from silver and gold to amaze their guests, whilst alchemists worked deep in the bowels of the castles, trying to turn base metal into gold, and inventing chemistry in the process. And funding all this, the tournaments, the universities, the art, and the wars, were the peasants, whose conditions may be subject to a lot of debate, but whose anger has become palpable. And all that might finally get us to a point where these people, speaking a similar language and participating in a similar culture, have developed a notion of being one people, the Germans. You know, I'm skeptical about these things, but maybe it is now time to discuss it. I'm still working on the details of the schedule, but the idea is to alternate between political history and cultural, social, and economic history, whilst the link from episode to episode will be geographical, taking us in a wide arc across the empire. We'll see whether we can pull that off, but given the wealth of material, it should definitely be interesting. In the meantime, if you are craving a more linear story to complement what is going on here, I would like to direct you to what is rapidly becoming one of my favorite history podcasts, The History of Venice. It is a well thought through and beautifully presented show. Simon and Jess are deeply involved with their subject and will walk you through the fascinating story of the city on the lagoon. And the best thing about it is, they're only on episode 18, so it's very easy to catch up with them and join what is promising to be a great show. As for us here, the new season, The Empire in the 15th Century, kicks off next Thursday with an episode about the appearance of the land graveyard of Hesse and why this made the Archbishop of Mainz very disappointed, and the Archbishop of Mainz did not like to be disappointed. I'll see you next week. And just in case you're wondering about the delay in today's episode, I had a serious audio software issue that distorted the first version so badly I had to delete it before it got distributed too widely. Deep apologies.